You are about to join a lecture of virus hoaxology. Your teacher is a Dr. Goodman. So take the law of opposites and break that name down and use the opposite.
Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about illnesses called...
Okay, I want to call your attention to the photograph in the upper left corner. Take a look at the arm stretching down. It looks like a fork. Okay? That's the devil's fingers. So what you're about to see is a bunch of nonsense. Now this man is also kind of always leaning right and left. That's important too. Watch that. Okay?
by viruses. Remember now, we've really moved down in size over 1,000-fold from bacteria. These are tiny, tiny particles that are not visible by anything but the electron microscope.
Ah, you can't see them. Nobody can see them, not even the average people with the average microscope. Only the electron microscope. Now, there's some questions being raised in my mind as to whether such a thing even exists, an electron microscope. However, we'll leave that for another thought and another video. But they're so tiny, only a special group of people can see these things called viruses.
And they are obligatory intracellular parasites. So they have to reproduce and get their energy from inside another cell. They run around 20 or 30 nanometers. And here you can see what they're composed of. They're extremely...
Okay, let's stop right there. Now this is supposed to be anatomy of a virus. Let's do it as an anatomy of numbers. Let's take a look. What do you see here? 6. 6. More 6s. More 6s. And this would be your 7.
Simple. They are composed of an outer protein coat and an inside with free strands of RNA or DNA.
Okay, every image that's going to be presented to you is in the shape of the human eye.
Kinds of viruses. And there's no nucleus, there's no metabolic machinery, there are no lipids, no proteins, nothing but the ability to replicate and information required on how to get into a cell. This is a typical looking virus, although it looks the size of the same slide I showed you on a bacterium. It's actually 1,000 times smaller. It's made again of a complicated outer prote and the...
Okay, what I see is a bullet. Okay, now this is a bullet to your brain. Alright? Now the inside there, you could say, is a Jacob's ladder. By that you mean 2 poles and then the false light going up between the 2 poles.
Coils of some kind of nucleic acid, whether it's RNA or DNA, and it might look on cross-sections.
Okay, what do you see? Just immediately, never mind all the scientific, medical, possibly totally BS. What do you see? I see an eye looking at me. An evil eye. And by the way, that is the definition of witchcraft. In the letter of Galatians, Paul the Apostle says, "Who has bewitched you? Who has cast the evil eye upon you?" An evil eye. That's witchcraft. There's an eye looking at you. Maybe all this is just total BS.
Something like this. there's no substrate for it to use. It's going to have to use everything that the...
Okay, now, I want you to notice something. The window in your upper left corner. I want to ask you a question. If you were a set designer, why would you design a window that looks at a brick wall? Why? What set designer would make a window whereby you're looking at a brick wall? It's because it's the sign of Mason. Masons, bricks. They're builders of false society. Just like Cain, the way of Cain. Go back into Genesis and study Cain. He's the ungodly seed that builds society. Go back to Genesis and look at the book of Jude. Now notice how this Mr. Good Man is positioned between a brick wall and a fork, which is supposed to be the human hand coming down out of the skeleton, which is a sign of the devil. Now it's almost as if he's always crossing these two poles. He will lean to the left. See how he leans to the left? And later he leans to the right. This man goes back and forth like a meter. Okay? Why? I think it's because he's using the two poles. He's using the blue pole and the red pole. He's using love and law. He's using concern. And he's using hoaxing. So he's weaving it together for you and for me and anybody who'll buy it. All right? Keep watching him.
Provides for its replication, and it can live outside the host for a very variable period of time, but it has to get in and hijack the metabolic machinery of the cell.
Okay, the metabolic machinery of the cell. Wow. These fancy words. I don't know about you, but I'll just say, well, I have to turn off my brain and trust him because he has a white coat on. See my other video about help me decide what shirt to wear.
Usually the cell is going to die in the process, but not always. Sometimes it can become dormant. It generally resists phagocytosis because these particles are just too small to be attacked by the bigger cells. It elicits an immune response more than an inflammatory response. And it may result in the production of lethal antibodies and a very strong immune memory. So once you're infected, you may get some antibodies that can kill the virus and then long-term memory through the memory cells, since most of these are attacked by the humoral or the antibody part of the immune system. It's a molecular response, not such a big cellular response. Now, if you look at this representation of a virus...
Okay, what do you see? I see an eye. More than that, this is very, very similar to what is called the tree of life. You can also go to Dave Johnson's YouTube channel, and he has a couple videos what he calls the mind computer. Take a look at that at Dave Johnson, and take a look at this, and take a look at what's called the tree of life in the Kabbalah. It looks pretty similar to me, and this whole thing is an eye. Once again, the evil eye is witchcraft.
The virus, or they're calling the virus unit a virion. I think a virus is an easier term to use, but it has receptors that it can find on the surface of a specific cell and attach to those and then cause penetration where it is absorbed in through the cell membrane and into the cytoplasm. Now, the RNA viruses generally replicate inside the cytoplasm, and they make messenger RNA, which then translates the DNA and uses DNA to make new virus particles. DNA viruses, such as they're depicting here, usually gets into the nucleus, uses the host DNA directly, and makes copies of its own DNA, and uses the machinery of the cell to make new protein coats, and it goes out by budding and gets back into the environment. And here they're showing 4 or 5 nice little new viruses. We're usually talking about hundreds or thousands of progeny.
Okay, that's why everybody's so paranoid right now, is because any, quote, human being can be so dangerous to be around because of all these little itty-bitty tiny things that are producing these mysterious viruses that are going to destroy the world. So they had to come up with a way to make sure that you're totally afraid of being around others. Now, the reason that behind that would be you don't want to listen to someone like me. In heaven's sakes, you don't want to run into me at the store and talk to me, because I just might tell you I'm not wearing a mask because I'm not worried about anything. Zero. Zero. Do you hear me? Zero. Nothing. I am worried about nothing.
And the viruses, of course, are only 1,000th the size of this cell, so they're much smaller than this, in contrast to the bacterium, which produces only 2 copies for every one that it starts with. We're talking about exponential growth here. Very, very.
Okay, exponential growth. Oh my gosh, this could take on the whole world. Now you have this, quote, scientific basis for your great hoaxes like the Great Plague of Europe, like the 1918 Spanish flu, like your Ebola, and all kinds of hoaxes that are going to scare the pants off of humanity.
Fast growth. Sometimes the viruses will immediately enter a new cycle, and other times they'll go dormant and wait for certain signals to replicate. This happens often in tumor transformation.
All right, transformation in the world of the occult would be your alchemy. You're creating something. You're creating something. Create these deadly viruses. Not in the real world, R-E-A-L, but in the world of real, R-E-E-L. In other words, it goes right into your mind because they just made a movie.
We're going to talk about, when we talk about cancer, certain viruses can cause cancer. The effect upon the cells varies a lot. The viral infection has a wide range of what it can do to the cell. It may damage the protein synthesis so the cell is weakened or dead. It interferes with the immune recognition system. So sometimes it can cause the host to attack the cell and kill it as if it were a foreign cell. It can malignantly transform, which I've said. And then another thing happens. Sometimes there's so much cell damage that you have, again, that perfect milieu for bacterial replication. And what you have is what we call a bacterial superinfection. It's an infection superimposed on the virus. And in the good practice of medicine,
I can't be completely sure, but it seems to me that almost everything related to the sicknesses and stuff is bacterial, not viral. Now again, I'm taking a little bit of a risk here by saying that, but it appears to me the whole concept of virus is a hoax. Okay, that's a pretty bold statement. I'm going to make it, and I'm not entirely sure, but it appears to me just the whole idea of virus is a hoax so that the world can be frightened of the bubonic plague of Europe, the Black Death, or the plague that killed 1/3. Then, of course, the so-called 1918 Spanish flu. and then on it goes. So anytime you bring anything up, people will say, remember the Great Plague of Europe. Remember the Spanish flu. It's a lot like the war themes. Remember the Alamo. Remember Pearl Harbor. Remember. Well, maybe your memory is faulty. Okay?
This is the time we usually jump in with antibiotics. In general, viruses should never be treated with antibiotics.
Because they probably don't exist. That's why. Probably. That's why you don't give antibiotics for viruses. Basically, if you have a virus, you do nothing. 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 And so they'll say, well, you don't give antibiotics for viruses.
They are not effective. In fact, we have no antiviral medicines.
See? No antiviral medicines. There's only one solution. Vaccination. Don't you see where this is coming to? There's no medicines for a flu virus. You just stay at home, take some mama's good old home noodle soup and wait it out. So there's no known medicines for viruses. There's only one quote answer: vaccination. Do you see what they just did?
It can be widely used. So antibiotics are reserved for bacterial infections and often, unfortunately, inappropriately used.
See, inappropriately used for viruses, because most likely all viruses are a hoax. Even your common flu virus, most likely.
Patients have colds, which are mostly always a virus.
Now wait a minute, there's a possibility here. There's a possibility that what is called a cold is just simply an allergic reaction. Possibility it's not a virus at all, because viruses maybe don't exist. I'm stepping out on you right here. Now look at how he leans to your right, and he leans to your left, between the brick wall on the left and the devil's hand on the right. He keeps leaning back in different directions. He won't stay in an upright position.
Is our main protection against viral illnesses, so it's prevention, and the degree of immunity is very variable. A common cold virus just doesn't stimulate a big immune response, whereas something like polio or...
Okay, maybe the common cold's just an allergic reaction. That's it, period. Your system doesn't like something in the air. Period.
Can give you virtually lifelong protection through the memory cells. The key problem with the virus...
Okay, notice how his left hand now is completely in line with the brick wall. What do the bricks stand for? Mason, builder of society, a false society.
Is that they multiply in this vast exponential mode, so that their numbers are just huge. Therefore, random mutations are going to be huge.
Okay, see my video on mutations. They mutate. That's how they explain all these new deadly viruses. That's how they explain every year, and he's going to say it, every year you should, quote, get a flu shot, because they're constantly mutating, which means it's never ending.
And very likely, over a period of time, natural selection is going to select for the best and the most resistant virus.
Okay, there's a reference to Darwin. Darwin. Natural selection. Look at him sticking his tongue out. Sticking the tongue out is kind of a symbol of being in the right when they're really in the wrong, or aggravating you or something.
that may evade our natural or acquired resistance and against our treatment that we may try to use. There's something called mutational drift, which is the constant, slow...
Oh, mutational drift, huh? In other words, that's the license to create any kind of monster you want in the field we call science, or even dare say medicine. They mutate. Therefore, you never know what kind of a virus is out there. Today it's this crazy, corny virus, coronavirus. Tomorrow it's another one. In previous times it was the Great Black Plague. It was the 1918 Spanish flu. It was an Ebola. Don't you get it? Mutation is alchemy or witchcraft, creating things to suit the magician.
Change that mutation will cause in these viruses, and yet there are other viruses which stay very stable and don't form many types or subspecies. The diagnosis of a viral illness is usually clinical.
It's basically you walk in, the doctor says you got a virus, I can do nothing. Go home, rest, drink plenty of fluids, and get some of your mama's homemade chicken noodle soup. Oh, that's a big diagnosis. I can diagnose that. Just go home and wait it out. Basically, that's it.
We usually see the signs and symptoms of a particular disease, and we'll go into what some of those are. And other times we have to use immunologic techniques. For example, my West Nile fever would never have been diagnosed with it.
Ah, the West Nile fever! Look at, I caught him! I caught you, Mr. Goodman! I caught you! West Nile fever. Oh, we're gonna have a whole bunch of fancy names. Avian flu comes from birds. Okay, the corny coronavirus came from a bat. Oh, look at that. He is so thrilled with himself, and he's thrilled that you're listening, and he's thrilled you're taking in all this hoax virology. Alrighty. This is a good place for me to stop, and I'll try to pick it up here again for you if you're interested to stay with me on how you can be hoaxed with virology, virus hoaxing. Thank you for watching. End of video.